You are 9 months pregnant. No hospital, no doctor, no painkillers, no sterile room, no machine monitoring your baby's heartbeat. Just you, a fire, and the women who have been preparing for this moment since the day they realized you were carrying a child. This is the most dangerous moment of your life, and it has been happening exactly like this for 300,000 years. Here is what nobody tells you about how ancient women survived it. Not just survived, but built the most sophisticated knowledge system in human history around the single most dangerous thing a human body can do. And here is what's even more extraordinary. We lost almost all of it. To understand what ancient women were facing, you need to understand something most people don't know about human birth. It is not supposed to be this hard. Every other primate, mahinon chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, gives birth relatively quickly, with minimal assistance, often alone. Human birth is different. Dangerously, uniquely different. Here's why. 2 million years ago, our ancestors started walking upright. Walking upright reshaped the pelvis, narrowed it, changed the angle of the birth canal in ways that made delivery significantly more complicated. At exactly the same time, human brains were growing larger. Bigger brains meant bigger heads. Bigger heads trying to pass through a narrower pelvis. The result? A birth process so complex that no other primate experiences anything like it. The baby must rotate as it passes through the birth canal, turning its head 90 degrees to navigate the narrow passage. It emerges facing backward, away from the mother, which means the mother cannot reach down and guide it without risking injury. Every other primate can reach down and assist its own delivery. Human mothers cannot. This single biological fact changed everything. It meant human birth required another person. Not as comfort, not as tradition, as biological necessity. We are the only species on Earth that cannot reliably give birth alone. And estimates suggest that without assistance, roughly 1 in 3 women died in childbirth throughout human history. 1 in 3. Think about someone you love. Think about 3 women you know. That was the reality every pregnant woman in the ancient world woke up knowing. Her name is lost. It will always be lost. Because she lived before writing, before record, before anyone thought to preserve the names of women who spent their lives keeping other women alive. But she existed in every tribe, in every community, across every continent where humans have ever lived. She was the midwife, and she was the first medical professional in human history. Not a shaman, not a healer of wounds, not a medicine man. A woman who had watched dozens of births, who had felt with her hands what a correctly positioned baby felt like, and what a wrongly positioned one felt like. Who knew which plants reduced bleeding after delivery? Which positions opened the pelvis most effectively? How to turn a baby that was coming the wrong way? How to clear a newborn's airway when it wasn't breathing? In 2014, researchers analyzing Neanderthal remains found skeletal evidence of injuries consistent with someone who spent years kneeling and supporting laboring women. These weren't helpful bystanders. These were specialists with repetitive strain injuries from decades of practice. The world's first medical professionals had no title, no institution, no written certification, just knowledge passed from woman to woman, hand to hand, across hundreds of thousands of years. And here is what made them extraordinary. They learned faster than any hospital system ever has. Because birth happened constantly, in every generation, in every season. Every birth that went wrong was a lesson. Every technique that saved a life was remembered, refined, and taught to the next generation. 300,000 years of clinical trials with no laboratory, no funding, and no one writing it down. The moment a woman's pregnancy became visible, the entire community shifted. This wasn't sentiment. This was survival strategy. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies, the Hadza in Tanzania, the Kung in the Kalahari, have documented exactly what this looked like. Other women in the tribe immediately began adjusting their roles. They took over the pregnant woman's heaviest physical labor, brought her extra food, specifically the foods that experienced women knew supported a healthy pregnancy, began preparing the knowledge she would need, and weeks before the birth was expected, a location was chosen, not randomly, a specific place away from the main camp for privacy and quiet, but close enough for safety. Somewhere with soft ground, access to water, natural shelter from wind. Archaeological sites across Africa and Europe show evidence of these birthing locations. Small clearings with unusual concentrations of tools, burned plant remains, and medicinal herbs. They were the world's first delivery rooms, prepared, intentional, specialized. And when labor began, the woman was never alone. Typically 3 to 5 women surrounded her, each with a specific role. One midwife managed the delivery, checking position, feeling for the baby's head, reading the labor's progress with her hands. One supported the woman physically, letting her lean back, holding her weight during contractions. One prepared warm water, medicinal plants, and tools. Others kept the fire burning and watched the perimeter, because labor could last hours or days, and the sounds it produced attracted predators. This was not improvised. This was a system refined across thousands of generations, operating with a precision that no single individual could achieve alone. She did not lie on her back. That position, the one every hospital birth scene in every movie ever made shows, is a modern invention, designed for the doctor's convenience, not the mother's. Ancient women squatted, knelt, stood, used gravity the way the human body was designed to use it. The midwife's hands never stopped moving, feeling the baby's position, guiding the head, using techniques to prevent tearing that modern midwives are only now formally studying. If the baby was coming the wrong way, breech, sideways, cord around the neck, the experienced midwife knew what to do. She had seen it before, had learned. From the woman who taught her, who had learned from the woman who taught her. Reaching inside, turning the baby, repositioning, not guessing, remembering. And when the baby finally came, it was placed immediately on the mother's chest, skin to skin, the warmth of the mother's body regulating the newborn's temperature. The heartbeat the baby had heard for 9 months. Still there, still steady. Then, they waited. They did not cut the cord immediately. They waited for it to stop pulsing, allowing every last drop of blood to transfer from the placenta to the baby. Modern medicine rediscovered this in the 1990s, called it delayed cord clamping, published studies proving its benefits. Ancient midwives knew it 50,000 years ago. They knew it because they watched, because they paid attention, because the babies whose cords were cut early did not thrive as well as the babies whose cords were not. No laboratory, no study design, no peer review, just 50,000 years of careful observation. Not every birth ended with a healthy baby and a living mother. The ancient world knew this better than we allow ourselves to imagine. 1 in 3 women. Every midwife who practiced long enough had held a woman who did not survive, had delivered a baby that did not breathe, had made decisions in moments of crisis that no amount of preparation fully prepares you for. Burial sites from 100,000 years ago show infant remains buried with extraordinary care. Small graves, grave goods, ochre, shells, objects of beauty, placed with deliberate intention. These were not discarded. These were mourned. A community that buried its lost infants with ceremony and reverence was a community that understood grief and had built structures around it to help people survive it. The midwife who lost a mother or a baby did not stop practicing. She carried that knowledge forward. The knowledge of what went wrong, of what she would do differently, of what she would watch for next time. Loss was not failure. Loss was information. And that information, accumulated across generations, is what made ancient midwifery more sophisticated than most people will ever give it credit for. The birth was not the end. In many ways, it was the beginning of the most critical period. The new mother did not return to work the next day, or the next week. For weeks, sometimes months, the community fed her, cared for her older children, ensured she could rest, recover, and establish breastfeeding without the pressure of survival competing for her energy. This was not generosity. This was embedded in the social contract, because the tribe that took care of its mothers had more surviving children. A 2017 study published in the journal Birth analyzed outcomes of over 15,000 deliveries. Women who had continuous support from another experienced woman during labor had 25% shorter labors, were significantly less likely to need interventions, reported dramatically higher satisfaction. The effect was strongest when the support person was experienced but not medically trained, exactly like an ancient midwife. The ancient world built this support not because they read a study, but because they watched what happened to mothers who had it versus mothers who didn't. The mothers who had it survived more often. Their babies survived more often. That was evidence enough. For 300,000 years, this knowledge passed from woman to woman, hand to hand, voice to voice, in the space between one generation and the next. It was never written down, not because it wasn't important, but because it existed in a domain that the people who controlled writing did not consider worth recording. Women's knowledge, women's work, women's domain, and then, in the span of a few centuries, most of it disappeared. Colonization disrupted indigenous communities across every continent, breaking the chains of transmission that had held for thousands of generations. Industrialization moved birth from homes and communities into hospitals, where the knowledge of midwives was replaced by the procedures of physicians who had often never witnessed a birth before medical school. In 17th century Europe, male physicians began taking over childbirth. From female midwives, they brought forceps. They brought surgical intervention. They brought the confidence of institutional authority, and for a period, maternal mortality in hospitals was significantly higher than births attended by midwives at home, because the physicians were working without the accumulated knowledge of 300,000 years. They had instruments. They had theory. They didn't have what every experienced midwife had, this knowledge that lives only in hands that have done this thousands of times. Not all of it disappeared. In 2019, anthropologists working with the Aka people in Central Africa documented birth practices that likely stretch back to our common ancestors. The Aka midwives still use the same positioning techniques, the same plant medicines, the same support structures, mirroring archaeological evidence from sites 40,000 years old. An unbroken chain, 40,000 years of knowledge, still alive in the hands of women who were never asked to write it down, because they never needed to. It lived in practice, in memory, in the relationship between the woman who knew and the woman learning to know. Fragments of this knowledge exist in every culture that has never fully abandoned its traditional birth practices, in every community where experienced women still surround a laboring mother, in every tradition that treats birth as a communal responsibility rather than a medical procedure to be managed by specialists who leave when their shift ends. She is 9 months pregnant, 50,000 years. Ego, the fire is burning. The women she has known her entire life are around her. The midwife's hands are steady, because they have done this more times than she can count. This woman is terrified, but she is not alone. And not being alone in that specific moment, in that specific way, is the difference between the human species continuing and ending. Every person alive today is descended from a woman who survived that moment, and most of them survived it not because their bodies were stronger, but because someone who knew was there. Hands that had learned from hands that had learned from hands that had learned. An unbroken chain stretching back 300,000 years to the first woman who stayed beside another woman in her most dangerous moment and refused to leave.